All right, well, we're going to talk about the Scottish gender bill because guess what? It took a man to realize that it was a violation of women's rights. We did not see this happening with woman Nicola Sturgeon, who's the Prime Minister of Scotland. She pushed this through all last year. The bill became signed into law or was voted into law in December. But now the United Kingdom has said it will challenge this and not allow it to come into law. This is the first time that the UK has blocked a law in Scotland from becoming law, and they're mad as snakes about it. This is the gender ID bill that we've been discussing, and it was hotly protested by feminists, but still passed in December. The law would make it easier for people to change their legally recognized gender. So mostly this is about birth certificates, but birth certificates which will give someone access into a different sexed space. The age to do this will drop from 16 to 18 years old. Why is that contentious? Why that 2 years do they absolutely need? Anybody? Any reasons for this?
Well, now they're not an adult, so you mean to tell me that they have gender dysphoria, they're that young, and they don't need a parent's approval?
And they don't need a doctor's approval. This will no longer require a medical diagnosis of gender dysphoria. So you don't have to have been seen by a specialist. You don't have to have presented as this gender for any given time. You just literally tomorrow can go and change your legally recognized sex. Less bureaucratic, you know?
I always get so irritated with this narrative because it's like, remembering my childhood, there were times I thought I was John from Chips. I thought I was Spider-Man. So like at any point, like if I would have thought that I was having, what would that be? Hero dysphoria, you know, like they would have changed my whole being to revolve around that. I mean, it's the same thing. You have kids going through stages and that should be embraced, but not, you know, just saying, oh, I guess you're not this gender.
But we're talking about two finite choices, male and female, right? And so you always, as a child, understood that there were these two things. But there are a myriad of professions, if we're going to call superheroes a profession.
Well, I guess, but I didn't as a child, like that would never be a focus. Like I didn't focus on gender. I didn't really, you know, like, I liked girls or whatever, but I didn't look at it as because it was a girl. It was just a feeling that I had. I didn't there was no reason for gender to even be in my mind at that age.
Yes, but gender, we've talked many times about how there is a growing social component to this that makes people, you know, I was listening to a therapist talk about this recently, and she said that a lot of times these young kids, they are not fantasizing, but they're sort of playing with academic terms around gender as, what's the word that I used for it? It's like, it's not an affectation. They are...
Like role-playing?
They're sort of role-playing academics, having not actually read the canon of academia, but throwing around these academic terms to validate what they think is then a progressive and accepting way to be, not understanding that it's actually not a progressive and accepting way to be. So for instance, if you're a therapist, if I'm a therapist and you come to me and say, I really want to live my life as a woman and I'm going to take these steps to do it, and I say, okay, let's go ahead and do that, then we are going to have to collectively agree that the goal of your life now is passing as a different gender, and that's going to be really stinking hard on you and your psyche, because I'm just looking at you right now and I'm thinking you're going to need shoulder surgery, which is now a thing that they shave off parts of their shoulders to have a more feminine body frame. You're going to have to do something about the stubble because Clayton shaves and then an hour later has a 5 o'clock shadow.
I'm a werewolf.
You're going to have to do something about those really aggressive eyebrows you've got.
Really aggressive.
Yeah. In fact, when I was pregnant with our first child...
Stop it, you're scaring me. Quit it, leave me alone.
When I was pregnant with our first child, my mom said, do you think the baby's going to have those eyebrows?
My eyebrows are offending you. They're so aggressive.
But
it's a microaggression, my eyebrows.
My point is that you are going to have to obsess about what other people think of you and your appearance. And I don't know any therapist that would say, let's sign you up for this. you're going to obsess about your appearance and you're going to worry about constantly having social acceptance. Great idea. This is what I've signed you up for.
So this is why the United Kingdom, the UK government in Britain, stepping in and saying, whoa, wait a second on this bill. And they put together this 57-page, blockage bill to stop this from happening in Scotland.
And so you might think, oh, well, making life easier for transgender people, that would be nice, right? But it also means, one, that we should not agree that this would make their lives easier, because again, you're telling someone, okay, then you obsess about, passing for a different gender. Instead of like, what's going on there? Let's help you. Right? Having to obsess about your appearance. And there's a lot of anxiety that goes along with that. That's one. But two, what about single-sex spaces? Now, there would be no single-sex spaces if someone like J.K. Rowling, who recently opened a domestic abuse shelter for biological women only, and if somebody were to come in with this birth certificate and say, I'm a woman, and she said, and people at this shelter say, no, you're not. And they say, well, I have the paperwork. You have to let me in here.
Right. And then
that's extremely problematic.
And then, of course, she was labeled transphobic as a result of it.
Yes.
And there was all this backlash around the Harry Potter thing. Just as a side note, if I may, I was listening to a podcast where they were talking about the new Harry Potter Hogwarts game that's coming out.
Oh,
right?
yes.
And there's this big boycott, right? There's people who are like, oh, no, that money's going to go to J.K. Rowling. She's going to make money off of the Hogwarts game, right? Well, that's blown up because now pre-orders are off the charts. It's going to be it's blown up in these people's faces. But the point is, when they were talking about it, they're like, well, what's the story behind this game? And J.K. Rowling, and why are people boycotting it? And the guy said, oh, because she made some transphobic comments, and now people I'm like, no, actually, she did not.
They're not
transphobic
comments. She wants to protect single-sex spaces for women.
But there's so much ignorance about what she said that it became very easy to say she's transphobic. No, she didn't. She wants women to be able to have single-sex spaces.
In fact, I follow a TRA account, like a feed of stuff, which is trans rights activists. And one person was saying that they were super depressed that Simon Pegg had voiced, I think it's RAB, Regulus Black. RAB.
Okay.
So anyway, he's the voice of Regulus, and they're like, oh no, he participated. Simon Pegg, now we have to hate him.
Give me a break.
Because he participated in a J.K. Rowling related
Hogwarts game
program. Yeah.
Ridiculous.
Well, and you know what's really sad about this whole thing is the reason that she is J.K. Rowling is because the publishing company didn't think the people would take a book like that written by a female seriously. So they put it as J.K. so people would assume she was a man. So she should be held up to she did that for women. Like, that was a huge accomplishment for women. So she should be proud of that.
Okay, so let's get to this. You didn't know that?
No,
yeah.
I didn't.
I think her name is Joanna, right? Joanna.
I believe so.
So let's get to the fight as it relates to UK versus Scotland, because it's kind of fun to watch, I'm going to say. This is the first time, again, that the UK has blocked a law that Scotland voted into effect because it affects UK law. Scottish Secretary Alistair Jack says that he is doing this due to concerns on how the law would impact operation of Great Britain-wide equalities legislation. He's saying that this law could affect the rights to, say, run a single-sex club. For instance, a lesbian club. You can't have a lesbian club anymore if I can change my gender just to get in. Then you have men there saying, you really do want a man, you're not a lesbian. Associations, schools, single-sex schools, as well as equal pay for men and women. He says he would entertain an amended bill in the future. Nicola Sturgeon, though, the Prime Minister of Scotland, is furious. She says this is a full frontal attack on Scottish Parliament. The sort of like sexual suggestion of that full frontal, I feel like there's something there that I can't quite. I can't make a joke with it.
You can't reach out and grab it.
Like, I want
to go the full Monty.
The full Monty,
do it.
right? I can't get there to make a joke of it, but I'm like, oh, but we're talking about female anatomy, and you just said full frontal. You make that joke yourself, because I am unable. She also says that it will have a significant impact on protections contained in UK equalities. And she said Scotland will mount a legal challenge to this. So how big will that challenge be? Will they fight just the bill, or will they sort of say, well, you're not the boss of me, I'm out of here, run away like a child who is told to do something? I mean, I don't want to say she's being childish, but you see the analogy that I'm making here is like when your daddy says, oh, yes, you'll follow my rules as long as you live under my house, then there's motivation there to no longer live under my house. And will they then do something? There is a second referendum working its way through Scottish government. No one really expected it to go very far, but maybe. Do you want to play the video you brought about the infighting?
This was this afternoon, of course, the Parliament and the debate inside of Parliament back and forth, and it got pretty heated. I mean, there was some throwdown. There was a lot of throwing back and forth. So yeah, you had Alistair, you had Scottish Secretary Alistair Jack saying that these concerns, this law should of course be blocked. Right? There's others saying no, we should let this go forward. This is Scottish, and this is the independence of Scotland. Don't you respect the democracy of Scotland? So here was some of this debate this afternoon. Watch.
I was making the point that democracy matters and that this UK government is seeking to consistently ignore Scotland's democracy. I mentioned the right to strike, and of course I mentioned the EU retained law bill. But it's also true in respect of Brexit as a whole. 72% of Scots want to rejoin the European Union, yet this UK government, and indeed this Labour Party, have absolutely no interest in that position whatsoever. Of course I will.
I know he's not had an opportunity to look at the statement of reasons, some because it's 57 paragraphs of which you've just been served up. I've had a quick chance to have a look at this, and can I say to my honourable friend, maybe not bother having a look at this in any great detail because it's specious, it's hypothetical and it's poorly informed. And one example of that, Mr Speaker, is on equal pay. You seem to believe that a trans man would take advantage of the opportunity to be paid less. It's the type of rubbish that's included in this. What do you think of that?
Mr Speaker, I've not obviously had the opportunity to look at that myself, but if that is the case, it is a complete and utter embarrassment. And it shows that just as this Secretary of State was unprepared today in relation to this matter, so too is his government in relation to the arguments that they are putting forward. I'm a little bit embarrassed for them.
Yeah.
But it speaks to the idea.
Someone in the chat was asking what language were they speaking. That was English.
It does speak to the idea of, it has. What the worry is, not that transgender people will abuse this, but that other people who are not trans will use it to gain access to spaces that make people unsafe. But then also the idea that a trans man would self-select into an abused group and take lesser pay to make them more authentically, I guess, of that group. Or a trans woman would, no, because it's women who are, I'm sorry, I misused. It's a trans woman who would self-select into an oppressed group in order to authenticate their participation in that group. It speaks to academics who are saying this, that sometimes this is used by people who are not of an oppressed group to self-select in. I do want to point out that Nicola Sturgeon does not have unanimous support for this gender ID bill. Here she is being shouted down last fall at a conference on women's rights, no less, for her refusal to actually preserve women's rights. Take a look.
Shame on you. You've fermented this culture in Scotland that basically tells women are bigoted for standing up for women's rights. I see you, and thousands of women around Scotland see you as well. And those of you who are sitting here complicit, keeping your mouths shut while women have actually been raped by males who have self-ID'd as women. And that's got nothing to do with trans rights. And I support trans rights and have done for 3 decades now, and I'll continue to. Now,
I want to point out that all of this fighting is not what TRAs want. trans rights activists, they do better when they fly under the radar and sneak these laws into existence like they did in Ireland. That absolutely happened. Ireland went from having no provision for changing legal sex to allowing anyone to do it for any purpose by printing out a form, writing their name, signing in a form, and no fee. And then you just send it by post with your original birth certificate, and you get it right back. The UK did not have the opportunity to stop this bill in Ireland, but they are taking the opportunity to do this. But also, it wasn't public, and so fighting about this and pointing out how this makes women's spaces unsafe. And when pushed on how do you make sure that dangerous males don't use this to self-select into women's spaces, her response has basically been, well, when they, attack a woman, we'll know that they're abusing it. So then let's wait for that to happen, and then we'll know that someone has so that makes women bait.
Right.
Or cannon fodder. That doesn't make sense. Now, it turns out that when the Irish law was put into place, that was done very secretive. In fact, take a look at this excerpt from Helen Joyce's book, that in 2019, Dentons, the world's largest law firm, published a report it had prepared pro bono for this network of LGBT organizations in Europe. And it was titled Only Adults, Good Legal Practices and Legal Gender Recognition for Youth. And it argued for the right to change one's legal sex at any age, without parental consent. So 7, totally fine. It acknowledged that this would be unpopular with the public, but other unpopular trans rights policies had already become law, they explained, citing gender self-ID in Ireland. And it recommended linking such proposals with unrelated ones that commanded broad support. In Ireland, it said self-ID had been brought in cover of same-sex marriage. So they sort of slip it in and make sure that we don't argue about it and that the public barely knows. It advised on staying out of the news. Irish trans activists had direct lobbied individual politicians and tried to keep press to a minimum. So the fact that we're even discussing this is because most voters say, yes, I want trans people to have rights, to exist, to be happy, to whatever, but I don't want to destroy women's rights in the meantime. I don't want to, make it so lesbians have no more safe spaces. I don't want to make it so that my daughters have nowhere to change with only biological women around them. But if we sort of slip these laws under the radar, it works to their advantage, and that's not what they're getting here. They're getting actually a real fight.
Where's the argument for equal rights? I mean, that's what they should be fighting for, equal. And it's like Ron Paul always said, you cannot take rights away from other people and give them to other people and expect there not to be some kind of fight. You just start putting people in groups, and you have to do things by the individual. Individual rights are what matter, because if I have a right, then the trans person has the same right. So it's like, that's a more fair system. And my main takeaway from that Parliament thing is, if you are going to transition, get a job as a man first, then transition.
Right.
So that you get the
higher pay. Yeah, you get the corner office, you get the great light, the sunshine.
Well, that begs the question that if there's equal right to public toilets, let's say, equal right to public spaces that involved changing or using the bathroom or what have you, why is the argument not a third space for people who are not binary?
Well, that's what I've been saying for a long time.
And the reason is because it's not about access to the space. For many TRAs, it's about validation. It's about the fact that I want you to see me as this legitimate gender, even though your biology is such that we are meant to instinctively distinguish gender. They don't want that. So, again, it's an interesting question about how big of a fight this will become, UK versus Scotland. Will it be another, I had to bring it, you guys. If we're talking about UK having their independence, I had to bring you this image. So,
a lot of people in the chat asking, like, where's William Wallace when you need him?
Interestingly enough, in the town of Sterling,
Or is an
where
American actor when you need him.
he's
I thought you
he's
meant. I think you
Australian.
mean Susan Wallace.
sorry.
He's Australian.
He's Australian.
I think he's half Australian and half American. And interestingly enough, when you go to the town of Sterling and see the castle where he waged his crusades, the images there in the gift shop are of Mel Gibson's face, because they don't have any images of William Wallace. They really don't know what he looks like, and he is now the recognizable archetype for this freedom. So remains to be seen. We'd like to know what you have to say about this. Will this mean that Scotland breaks off on its own? Will it get this big? What will happen?
And if it does, are they going to change it to Wilma Wallace?
That's right.
That's a good one.
Like that.
Very good.
Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going to redacted.inc. We'll see you next time.